Call the member for South West Coast.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and it gives me pleasure to rise today as the lead speaker for the Liberal Nationals on the debate of the Transport Legislation Amendment, Better Roads Victoria and Other Amendments Bill 2018. Whilst this is the first time I'm a lead speaker on any bill as the new Shadow Minister, it's not my first time speaking on the subject of road issues. In fact, over the last 3 years, it's been a very intense topic of discussion because South West roads do have the worst roads in the state. So the bill that's before the House today is an omnibus bill and introduces a number of sensible, if not overdue, amendments which we support. And these include the provision in the Road Safety Act 1986, which seeks to transfer greater responsibility for the administration of alcohol interlock devices to Vic roads, and thereby easing pressure off court resources. Clearly a sensible decision when this will take 5,000 matters out of the Magistrates Court that are currently being done, which are really of an administrative nature. So that's a good thing because the court pressure is certainly getting greater as we have more and more people coming into Victoria and rising crime rates. So any issue that I had with respect to this amendment has been clarified for me when I received a briefing from the department, and which I'm very grateful for, and thank you for that. Whilst the interlock devices will be removed in the Vic Roads office as a result of this change to the law, it will not take out of the court system more serious offences. In fact, this law will change the fact that people who do serious offences whilst under the influence of alcohol would have once been convicted for that serious offence, such as causing serious harm, injury to people, but now and would have actually gone without an interlock system. So now that will will be part of this legislative change as well. The bill also proposes minor amendments to the Heavy Vehicle National Law Application Act of 2013 and addresses some fatigue issues here. The Commercial Passenger Vehicle Industry Act 2017 has provisions for disciplinary actions for permission holders. The Transport Integration Act 2010, and this is basically about streamlining the transactions of land transfers between departments. So this is a good thing because it reduces costs and improves efficiencies, which is something I'm always very pleased to see the government working towards, because that obviously means improved savings. Transport Compliance and Miscellaneous Act of 1983 is also in the bill, and among other things, this actually clarifies some compensation issues for train drivers who are exposed to trauma incidences, and now includes others in the cabin who may be witnesses to these traumatic events. So we move to support these amendments as they do reduce red tape and streamline Transport Authority activities. And I do make note that this bill does mirror the bill that was introduced in the 58th Parliament, however, it didn't make its way through the process and was not debated in the Legislative Council. But where the bill actually fails is in the amendment to the Business Franchise Petroleum Products Act 1979 in relation to the Better Victoria Trust account, where I feel this is quite inadequate. The bill proposes to direct revenue from traffic infringements into the Better Roads Victoria Trust account to fund road maintenance and upgrades in Melbourne's outer suburban interface communities and throughout regional Victoria. So the bill proposes that 33% be devoted to the regional roads area and 33% to the outer suburban or interface areas, as they're called. The remainder is to be used to repair and upgrade roads and level crossings anywhere in the state. So I think this amendment falls short because there's no guarantee of long-term infrastructure funding, because it's reasonable to assume that funding from this source will actually dwindle as vehicles become increasingly automated. There is likely to be a reduction in traffic infringements because of the automation aspect. And the government just recently made announcements a few weeks ago about a trial around automated vehicles. So they are acutely aware of the industry working towards automation. And I certainly am finding that as I go around doing my due diligence, finding out more about the shadow portfolio of ports, freight and rural roads, that this is the direction the industry is heading in. So clearly there will be an impact on the Better Roads Victoria Trust Fund, and that needs to be addressed. there is actually no point if we cannot be confident of funds being available to legislate to have them quarantined. So I think that the fact that that makes 33%, which I actually think probably should be at 40%, completely inadequate, basically to fund the work that, the huge amount of work that we have to fix the roads, and be mindful of the fact that there may be some dwindling of these funds. So my suggestion is that the Liberals Nationals would like to move a reasoned amendment to the second reading speech, and I will have that circulated now. And I want to move that the Transport Amendment, Better Roads Victoria and Other Amendments Bill 2018 Reasoned Amendment be that I move that all the words after that be omitted and replaced with words "this bill be withdrawn" and redrafted to provide for an increase in guaranteed level of funding for rural, regional, outer suburban and interface communities from Better Roads Victoria funding, and to ensure that such funding is not reduced over time by a reduction in the total funding pool. So, why do I actually think that 33% won't cut it? Well, clearly our roads are bad. But don't take my word for it. Independent analysis found that roads in South West, for example, are the worst roads in the state. The RACV has calculated that South West roads have about 600 kilometres of distress roads that will cost about $486 million to repair. And that means that over one term of government, that we will need to see $120 million a year will be needed to fix distressed roads in South West Victoria alone. So in a report that was commissioned where the Auditor-General looked at the state of rural roads and was released just a little over a year ago in 2017, he found that the government, Andrews Labor government, severely lacked in ability. He found the government lacked strategy. The systems in place determined how to spend money to get the best return for taxpayers' money to manage roads. Assets were either non-existent, or if they were in place, the system was unable to speak to each other across the state, and therefore lacked any way of properly determining where money was actually best spent. This smacks of damning evidence that this government cannot manage roads, and its actual management system is shambolic. Notably, the Auditor-General's report found that the government mandates, and I think this is just something I wanted to point out early, it mandates that one of the tests for safety of roads, called skid resistance, should be carried out every 3 years, mandated to carry out every 3 years. But in the report, the Auditor-General is very clear and states it doesn't happen. So the government can't even carry out its own mandated requirements. The government's response to road pavement maintenance is reactive and is certainly not optimised. Maintenance is carried out when it's critical, and there is a policy of worst first, and this constitutes a really costly approach that is less than desirable than prevention and early intervention approaches. So exactly how costly is this? Well, to rehabilitate a road, that costs taxpayers between $70 and $175 per square metre. But to routinely maintain the road, that only costs $3 a square metre. So hence why it's so distressing to find that $1 billion is being put into a system that chooses to use $70 to $175 as its approach, rather than using a maintenance approach which costs $3. This is simply unbelievable. And why does this happen? Because the minister cannot get the department to stop, take stock of its approach and the systems, and stop wasting people's money. And why is that? Well, I don't know. The minister's the boss of the department. The buck stops with the boss. And guess what? That's the minister. Any business operator will tell you that it is basic business practice to manage your assets in a way that maintenance is strategically done and asset replacement is planned and managed. In my 20 years of managing a business, we completely had to have a handle on what the lifespan of an asset was and replace it accordingly. For example, on a farm, you replace pasture, it has about a 10-year lifespan, and you need to replace 10% of your pastures every year on a rotational management grazing process. And surely you would see that same sort of practice in the departments, but we're not seeing that. And the Auditor-General was quite clear. He said, he reported that there is no system for management of our country roads. I'm told by VicRoads people that 5% of Victorian roads need to be renovated per annum for the asset to be managed effectively. And yet, no surprises, we're not seeing that. In fact, they say it's around 2 to 3%. So woefully lower than it should be. So no wonder we're not able to have faith in our roads being functional and maintaining them at a rate that's safe. So this is such a lack of management capability, and that's one of government's problems. The second problem, though, is the funds themselves. It's a double-edged sword, however, because the government are saying that they are putting $1 billion into country roads over the next 4 years, and they say they did that in the last 4 years, so it's actually no surprise that we're seeing that roads aren't up to standard. They're throwing money away by using it very poorly. And if you're going to back fixing the same thing, same time over and over again, there's no wonder that there is no advancement in the asset's condition. This is no way that any business could survive if they use this approach in business. But when it's someone else's money, like in this case, Labor don't seem to care. The Labor government are clearly using a flawed approach, but it's taxpayers' money, so I assume they're comfortable that there's plenty more where that comes from. And given we saw them raise taxes 12 times in the last 4 years after saying that they would never raise a tax. Dan Andrews was, the Premier was actually explicit in saying he would not raise any taxes, promised that to Victorian people, and what did we see? 12 taxes. So we would expect we will see more of this because our roads are certainly not using that money effectively under this government's guidance. The other thing this government seems to be doing more of is using a technique of managing roads by just slowing people down. Again, to run a successful business, this is exactly the opposite to what you need to do. You need to keep efficiencies and productivity up, and slowing down does not help productivity. I see them stick up slow down signs wherever I go. The Princes Highway, we're seeing open stretches at 60 and 80, even down as low as 40 on the Princes Highway in southwest Victoria. The Hayward-Woolthorpe Road, a major truck route, slowed down to 80. It just smacks of just incredible poor understanding of productivity. So again, why won't 33% cut it? Well, our roads are no longer fit for purpose and they are crippling industry. Unless the minister gets a hold of the problem within her portfolio, we are missing out as a state. The opportunities that are able to be captured for agriculture alone are staggering on a global scale. Our food and fibre industries will be able to contribute enormous amounts of coffers to the state if it's harnessed this opportunity. With 19,000 kilometres of major rural roads and more than 4,000 bridges across country roads, there is only going to be more problems if change isn't soon. There are significant parts of the network that need some renewal, and if we want industry and general population to be kept moving safely and efficiently, then change is what we need. Businesses in my own backyard are suffering the effects of our appalling road pavements. There are still issues in the Glenelg Shire around Portland area, which is actually Victoria's second busiest port. And the RACV manager of roads and traffic, Dave Jones, says it's a real hurdle for the region that creates 10% of Victoria's gross domestic product. Brian Williamson, a managing director of freight operator Port Hall, says that the roads have deteriorated to such a terrible state the company has been spending an extra $100,000 or more on repairing damage to the 60 trucks caused by poor roads around Portland. They're $500,000 rigs, he says, and we are spending money on them while they're still fairly new, repairing parts that should not be breaking, like spring hangers and kingpins. Just last Saturday in the local Standard newspaper in Warrnambool, Graham Ryan of Ryan's Transports, Mike Steele from Bamstone Steel and Glenn Owen from Owen Trusses were talking about how their products are getting damaged. And you've heard me say in this place before that Mike Steele, who runs a Bluestone company, says his pavers are turning up to jobs fractured and broken. That says a lot when the road is responsible for the fact that it can do damage to a Bluestone picture. Graham Ryan and I have had many conversations of Ryan's Transport, moving people all over the world, Ryan's Transport does. And what he tells me is if he ran his workyard, the way the government runs the roads, he would be absolutely in trouble with WorkSafe, because the damage to the roads is putting his drivers at risk, and if it was in his workplace that he had potholes like that in his workyard and somebody was hurt, this would be akin to a work cover issue. And I've had that conversation with Graham many times about this double standard that is expected by this government compared with business owners. And he's right. He's basically saying he's worried about his drivers and our roads are unsafe. People on rural roads are dying almost 4 times the rate of people using city roads, killed because our roads are not up to the standard. So that's 2,500 people who'll die in the next 10 years on country roads. And this is an even more just staggering figure, that 50,000 people will be hospitalised with serious and life-changing injuries as a result of our roads. I'm going to repeat that. That's 2,500 Victorians, country Victorians, who will die on our roads in the next 10 years because our roads are not getting the attention they deserve. And 50,000 people whose lives will have life-changing injuries. That's their families, that's people affected with life-changing injuries. Rural people are consistently telling me that their roads are important but very unsafe. And it's very important. 96% of people who responded to a survey said roads are important and unsafe. So the RACV, another part of their review, said 10% of roads in southwest Victoria are poor or very poor. Now, that is alarming when you consider that our region is the state's biggest agricultural producer. And when this points to the lack of understanding of the correlation between producing products and being able to compete in the world and produce taxes to get Victoria moving faster and safely, that helps our roads. But back to business and how our roads are reducing productivity and reducing the competitiveness of our state. Don't take my word for it. Here again is what the RACV said. Rural businesses have had it with the state of country roads in Victoria. So, again, why are we, the Liberal Nationals, believing a reasoned amendment is necessary for this bill? Well, our road network is suffering as a result of decreased and insufficient funding. The Victorian Auditor-General again says that state funding roads network is insufficient and funding has actually decreased. Funding has actually decreased, particularly in the area of maintenance, by 41%. And that, coupled with the mismanagement of funds, effectively having a government chasing their tail, is just never going to work. We see all the time this government's inability to run businesses, to run the state as a business, to run projects where there's cost overruns and overspending consistently, and, as I'm pointing out, mismanagement of the funds they also have. And these funds are actually not indexed, so funding has not kept pace with road construction, hasn't kept pace with maintenance needs, and hasn't kept pace with the costs of building roads and bridges. And this is a part that I found very, very disturbing when I read, but because according to economic forecasting, at the current level of investment that we're seeing right now, seen for the last 4 years, road deterioration will continue to the extent that 50% of the road network will be in poor condition by 2025. That's only 6 years from now, and I'm going to repeat that. That is 50% of our roads in poor condition. That's alarming. 6 years. I know how fast I found 6 years goes. So it's absolutely clear the government's haphazard, reactive approach to road maintenance is costly and ineffective. So another issue that my colleagues and I constantly have brought into our electorate offices is that roads are falling apart within weeks of having been repaired. And beside me sits the member for Lowan, who just last week raised in this place an issue about an intersection that had been repaired and had just fallen apart. In my electorate, the Mima MacArthur Road, a road that had been campaigned by the community for years and years to get done. In the first 3 months, with the first rainfall, we saw the blocked drains create water sitting on the road and potholes in that beautiful new construction site that had just been finished 3 months. It was an absolute disgrace, and didn't the community go berserk about that? Rightfully so. So the government bills succeeds in cutting some red tape and tidying things up a bit, but what it raises is the question of Regional Roads Victoria. Basically, I think that what we want to see as the members of this side of the House is, are they taking these recommendations that the Victorian Auditor-General has put forward about how shambolic the system is and actually looking at how the system can be better raised? Because all I'm seeing out in the country is billboards and ads on the radio telling us that Regional Roads Victoria is doing a great job fixing roads. Well, the evidence isn't on the table that I can see just yet. So let's start pushing government to get their management systems in order, because according to the Auditor-General, once again, there is actually inadequate data collection. So how can you manage a system if you don't know what's wrong with it? Deterioration factors are not monitored. There's actually 10 key road deterioration factors that you use to assess a road, but they're not even using 4 of these factors to do their assessment. So issues relating to data collection, consolidation, use are really widespread in the department. That it's just amazing to have a good read of this report, and I urge you to do so. There are disparate systems and databases in use. Now that means regional officers recording data in separate spreadsheets can't actually compare with other areas because there's no centralised road assessment system. And data concerning our rural roads is not validated through a central system, which might trigger further assessments and repairs. Alarmingly, and this one really is quite alarming, there is no overall governance policy existing around the data collection. Also, maintenance reporting isn't mandated. So what we found is reporting only reflects planned work rather than all work which has been carried out. So when the government does manage to collect the relevant data, it's unable to make proper use of it because existing databases are not integrated to enable network-wide evaluation. The government does not have the capacity to consolidate and review information about our road network. Consequently, statewide decision-making is not driven by important factors such as the condition of the road itself, such as the condition of the road pavement. Rural data is out of date concerning rural regional roads are not centralised, we've already said that, but they're only inspecting the rural roads every 12 months, yet freeways are inspected much more often. And this means data upon which decisions are based can have a full year out of date. They can be a full year out of date. And this is particularly concerning in areas which have been ravaged by floods or other extreme weather events. Now, just 2 days ago in the Wangaratta Chronicle, we saw an article about how the community there are saying we need help with getting our road fixed. Oh, we all remember the story last year when the floods hit that area. Well, those roads are being left with no repairs because there's no system, and they're not in that system because it doesn't exist to get those roads fixed. So, moreover, the government is not able to access historical data regarding past maintenance issues, and this creates very real problems when trying to plan a maintenance program for the following year. One other issue that really distressed me when I was doing my research into this bill and working out whether it was adequate is that contractor monitoring and compliance issues are really poorly managed by government, and there's confusion and lack of understanding that doesn't relate just to the condition of our roads. It actually relates to the way the government understands and evaluates contractors employed to fix them. Contractor performance is not accurately measured because the government, surprise, surprise, does not oversee things centrally. So timeliness and quality of work are assessed regionally, albeit via numerous contract arrangements and monitoring systems. No benchmarking. But cost effectiveness and quality are not assessed at all. Unbelievable. I don't know if anyone else has run a business here, but if that was how I ran my business, we would have gone broke years ago. In fact, I don't reckon you'd even get off the ground. Consequently, the government is unable to evaluate, compare or benchmark performance at a regional or statewide level. There is also the potential for conflicts of interest. And I've had many people in the office who know the Vic Road system quite well talk to me about this, but this is out of the Auditor-General's report, so this is not hearsay. This is after investigation and research. Historically, road contractors have also been employed as road inspectors. So the person who's fixing it inspects what they've fixed. Contractors have been subject to performance ratings, and as a consequence, they frequently only register hazards and defects that they can address confidently. So they're not actually doing the whole works, it's only what's easy. There is a conflict of interest here, and that's what I'm trying to point out. How can you assess a problem that you design the solution for and provide the tender for? How can you be objective on that job? Of course, if you think you can get away with as little material as you can possibly use, then that's what you'll put forward. And if nobody is actually monitoring, which is again what the report points out, no one is monitoring the work that is being done, no one's testing how many, whether it's 30 centimetres or 60 centimetres of rubble that's been put down, how can we understand if the government is getting a good return on investment if there's actually no way of monitoring this system? So look, I'll conclude by saying the bill doesn't go far enough towards fixing our state's dangerous road network, and it is clearly not a priority for this government. Government keeps delaying this bill, and that's what I said earlier. It's been through the House and the government put out some terrific press releases last year, and we'd rather see them grandstand than find real solutions. The postponement of this bill didn't stop the former minister putting out a media release on the 9th of August last year under the headline $2 billion guaranteed to fix country and suburban roads. And this is the point that my colleague beside me makes. You know, this was 2015 that it was first discussed, and we're now 4 years on, 2019. So perhaps the minister of the past should have said, he should have put a little disclaimer in that press release and said that you'll only get it if we pass it through Parliament, and he certainly didn't put it in the track basket to get through at all. But roads are important, even when you pass the tram lines of the city. Rural people do matter, and our lives and safety matter too. Our industries matter and are stifled by underinvestment in our roads. The passage of freight is slowed and the safe arrival is jeopardised. Businesses wear these increases and maintenance costs on maintenance costs to their business when the roads are poor. This means there's less likely to be products that are wanted overseas or wanted domestically that we're producing because they're damaged. So this means taxes for Victoria that could be put into hospitals, more roads themselves, more schools are being compromised. So shoddy patch-up jobs are simply not the answer. They put people at risk and they end up costing more in the long run. Effective road management is essential so we can plan, review and resource appropriately. Let's straighten out the tender process. Government, come on, do your job, run the state like a business. So do what normal businesses do. Use practices that are really quite standard. Yep, absolutely. Well, the running of a contract is what we do in business and it's what you do in government. So straighten out your tender process and so that the taxpayer is confident that the road that's getting built meets specification because you've been monitoring, part of basic work practice, and is independently assessed, and that there is actually a good return on investment. And that's just what any business that's commissioning any work would do, and the state has a similar responsibility. I can't believe you think that's not appropriate. This bill offers rural people a token, inadequate and potentially dwindling source of funding. It fixes some issues relating to the red tape and administration. It doesn't fix or even address the larger and more serious issues at play here. The government's mismanagement of our roads because the system used is shambolic. It's a mess and you know it. The safety of rural people and the survival of the industries upon which we all rely is vital to Victoria. And I urge the government to seriously consider our reasoned amendment, because our roads are vital to getting product to market, to getting kids safe to school, to getting families home after school, getting dads home from work, getting mums into the workplace and home for picking up kids. Come on. These are the activities that we need to keep our people safe on our roads, and we're losing. Do you remember the statistics? Because I don't know if you could possibly forget them. 2,500 people in the next 10 years will be killed on our rural roads, but 50,000 people will have life-changing injuries. So they'll be left dealing with the effects of our fact that the road that they were travelling on left them maimed for life. So when the bus drivers come into my office and say, I really don't know if I can take this responsibility any longer, those 30 kids on the bus, I'm just really not coping with the fact that that responsibility is too great for me, because our roads will not cope. for much longer, and I'm not sure I'm going to take this responsibility on. And I've had members in my office say that. I know the member for Lowan has had that in her office because we've discussed this. So I urge the government to seriously consider our reasoned amendment, get back to the drawing board with this, and at least give us a fighting chance of getting our roads, both in the country and the city and the interface areas, some of which are growing like the Mitchell area, back into shape. And let's keep our families moving, let's keep our industries going. The state of Victoria and the state of our roads is something we should be investing in and moving very much forward, not backwards.